Good crew.
Yes, we do. Good morning, everybody. How was your Christmas? Did you get a lot? What'd you guys get? Television. You too?
Hello.
You guys, what'd you get for Christmas? Wow, remote control cars. Wow. Man, we got better presents than I did. You got a dollhouse?
How big is your dollhouse?
Well, what'd you get? A candle? Kindle. Oh, okay, Kindle. What is Kindle? Oh. Mom, I'm an iPad. Wow. Yeah, they got big presents compared to what I got, but that's okay. I got a phonograph. It's it plays records, it plays cassettes, it plays CDs. I have records, yes, I still have records. I'm from the old school here. I'm trying to take all my mom and dad's too, but they won't let me. They have a phonograph that plays records and is as old as I am. Because when it comes to that kind of technology, I need a book, because I do not get it. Yeah, well, sometimes for me, instructions don't come along. But God had sent an entourage of angels to tell the shepherds and everyone about the birth of a new king, which is Jesus. And for everyone that would welcome God sent Jesus, they would be given the promise of peace and goodwill. To accept Jesus binds us with pleasure and love from God. Ain't that cool? Jeff, will you lead us in the Lord's Prayer?
Sure. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Imagine Christmas is over. All the programs have been performed. All the pictures have been taken. The carolers are done singing. The holiday parties have come and gone. The presents are unwrapped. And the big dinners have all been eaten. The Christmas music is turned off. The family's headed back home. Someone from work is on the phone. The kids have a practice to get to. The house needs to be cleaned. The bills still need to be paid. The groceries are running low. The stock market is still down and up and down. The TV is still on. The news is still worrisome. Life just keeps going as if Christmas never happened. But it did happen. Look around. The church is full of family and friends and laughter, because the baby is still the Savior. And the Savior is still the gift held out to a world still looking for joy, an earth still waiting for peace, and the peaceful still sing in wonder of the God who gave his Son, and the Son who gave his life to add us to his family, and one day welcome us home. Imagine Christmas is over, but remember that it really happened, and it changed everything.
It's hard to believe that it's over. We're going to get educated this morning. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. One if by land, two if by sea, and on the opposite shore I will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. Remember that poem? What's the name of that poem? The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Many of us, including me, haven't listened to that poem or read that poem since grade school. Do you remember who wrote it? Longfellow, right? You heard it from behind you, right? Oh, it's up there. Oops. Okay. That's the title of today's message, is Longfellow. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Just as a point of reference, there are many different types of sermons that you'll hear throughout the year. Some are inspiring, others are designed to move you, others are designed to make you think, others designed to make you feel pretty uncomfortable as you sit here in church. And then there are those sermons that are what we call informative, kind of educational type sermons. And that's what today is. Today's message is educational. It's all about Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I was inspired by the song that we just sang. I heard the bells on Christmas Day. Did you listen to some of the verses there? The poem was written by Longfellow. It was converted to music several years later, but the poem was written by Longfellow. The stanzas are positive about hearing the bells on Christmas Day and spreading joy, peace on earth, and goodwill towards men. And then it talks about the world mocks this song that I sing. There's too much hate in the world. God's dead. And that's why we can't hear the bells on Christmas Day. So he gets pretty negative there, if you notice one of the stanzas. But then it gets positive again. And we're going to find out what happened to Longfellow as he was writing that particular poem. It took him quite a while to write it, actually. But as he was writing that poem, several things were going on in his life or had just occurred in his life. One of which was the fact that his second wife, who went by the nickname Fanny, can you imagine having a nickname like that today? Went by the nickname of Fanny, was killed in an accident that happened in their home. She was, on July the 9th, 18-something, she was working with her daughter and sealing locks of her hair in envelopes and sealing with hot wax. And somehow that day, as she was sealing that, they don't know if it was a candle or what happened, but her dress caught fire. And she started screaming loudly, and Longfellow was in the next room taking a nap. He woke up from his nap and ran in there and grabbed a rug
and threw it on her, but it was too small. So he's trying to put the flames out with his hands. And in doing so, he becomes badly burned. His hands and his face become badly burned. But he was in a bad way that the next day when she died, several days after that, he could not make it to her funeral because he was in such bad shape. And then we see Longfellow as we know him today with the long beard. It's because of all the scars that he had on his face, it was impossible to shave. So that's why Longfellow has, we see him and we know him as with the long beard, because he couldn't shave. So Longfellow was writing that poem just about the same time the Civil War was going on. In fact, Gettysburg had just occurred. It was shortly after Gettysburg. And so the country was at war. His son had just come home, was sent home actually because he was severely wounded, a son that ran away to join the Union Army. And Longfellow's thinking, what joy is there about hearing bells on Christmas Day? In fact, one of the things he said, "A Merry Christmas say the children, but that is no more for me." As he's thinking about the loss of his second wife, Fanny, thinking about all the loss that he had in his life, that we'll get to in just a minute, and thinking about his son who was borderline deaf because of his severe wounds from the Civil War, and the ravages of the war taking place in the country, all the negative things that were going on. Longfellow wrote the stanzas about hate taking over, and that there is no peace on earth and goodwill towards men. How can we sing about the bells on Christmas Day? I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then as it gets to the next stanza, if you recall, it says, "And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth," I said. "For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill towards men." For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill towards men. He's at the lowest point of his life. Something happened as he is writing this poem, and he's at the lowest point, and he pours his heart out into this poem about how bad things are. What happened to him? What happened to his life that he actually changed and came back with the last stanza a year later and said, "Then peal the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail and the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men." Something happened to Longfellow that he was able to write that final stanza. And so let's take a look back at some of his life. When he first graduated out of high school, which he graduated about the age of 15, he went to Bodine University, or college, in Maine. And there he studied literature. And upon graduation, he was offered a professorship with the condition that he goes overseas and studies different languages in Europe, studies German, studies Spanish, French. So he goes overseas and costs his dad over $2,000 while he was over there, which was a ton of money back in the 1830s and 40s. A ton of money back then, but it cost his father $2,000 for him to study. And he came back fluent in those languages, and he came back and went to work for Bodine University as a professor. Actually, he turned the job down when they offered it to him because it paid only $600 a year. So he said, that's not enough for a position for me to come and be a professor there. $600 a year is just not worthy of my time. So they came back and bumped the offer to $800 a year, plus $100 if he could be the librarian for the year as well. So he had $900 that first year, and he took it. A lot of money back then, $900. So he took the job, and while he was there, he hated every minute of it. He didn't like the fact that he was spending his time translating literature. He translated French to English, German to English, Spanish to English. He was well fluent in all these languages when he came back from overseas. So he found it very boring work. In fact, he writes that he hates the sight of pen and ink because of what he was doing. Shortly after that time, when he came back, he married his first wife, Mary Potter. And his first wife, this is what he looked like before the beard. His first wife was a longtime childhood friend of his from Portland, Maine, that agreed to marry him. And so, actually, they were married before he went overseas. And then when he went overseas, she was pregnant with her first child and miscarried at 6 months and died during the miscarriage. So he lost his first wife when she miscarried their son. So that was a tragedy for him as well. In 1831, then, that was when he married Mary Potter. And when he was overseas, he got a letter from Harvard where they offered him a professorship as well. And the professorship initially wasn't going to pay anything, and they still asked him to come and be a professor at Harvard without being paid. He said, no, I really can't do that. So they agreed to pay him about $900 as well to be a professor at Harvard. So he taught at Harvard, plus he continued to translate. And while he was overseas the second time, he learned Dutch, Danish, Swedish, Finnish, and Icelandic. And the guy knew every language out there. Plus he was well versed in Latin as well. That's what he studied as a kid, was Latin. So he knew all of these languages and was required or asked to translate all these pieces of literature that were written in those languages into English. And that's how he spent his time. And then, as we said, his second wife, then, he actually pursued Fanny for over 7 years. Fanny kept saying, no, I don't want to get married, not going to happen. And so Longfellow writes his first piece of prose literature, and it's a story about a young man traveling all through Europe who is in love with this particular girl, and she refutes him, and it's about his trials and tribulations after being turned down by this love of his life, which was patterned after what he was going through because Fanny kept saying no, she wouldn't marry. Finally, after 7 years of pursuing Fanny, she writes him a letter and says, yes, I'll marry you. He was so excited he didn't take a carriage, so he ran for 90 minutes to go see her. They set up the wedding and the marriage as well. His father-in-law gave them the house that's known as the Craigie House in Maine, and that particular house is where Longfellow actually passed away many years later. And then the story takes place where Fanny was sealing the locks of hair of their daughter, and in doing so, her dress caught fire, and she died as a result of those flames. I might add that before that all happened, they had 6 children, and Fanny was the first person in the United States to have ether as an anesthetic during childbirth. I don't know how safe that is, because I'm sure the kid got doses of ether as well, but ether was pretty popular back then. Longfellow, when he's dealing with all of his losses, actually turned to ether as an escape for himself. Some people turn to alcohol and pills, whatever. He actually turned to ether to get by day to day. Kind of a tough way to go. So his second wife passed away, excuse me, and for years he didn't write anything. He was just so depressed and so down about it. Finally, is when he started writing this particular Christmas carol, Christmas Bells, is when he started writing that as he's coming out of this depression. So he's writing this song, and then something happens as he identifies the despair in his life, and he identifies the despair in the country, because the Civil War, again, was just ravaging and going on, close to being over, but nobody really knew that. He was excited that Lincoln was re-elected. He thought that was a good idea. He wrote many books and poems about slavery, but he himself admitted that it was so soft about slavery that even a slave owner would not lose his breakfast reading it. Yet it was hailed as a good piece of literature for anti-slavery as he took that stand against that. What happened to Longfellow as he's writing this was the presence, the very real presence of Christ. He turned to Christ as he's recognizing all the despair in his life. And at the lowest point of his life, he was so depressed and so down that he himself feared the fact that his family would commit him to an asylum because they thought he was insane. He was so desperate. During that time is when he turned to Christ. And what happened to Longfellow is, with all the despair, he lost hope. And when you lose hope, you lose everything. And Longfellow is a prime example of that. Not being able to complete the song or the poem that he was writing as he intended when he first started to write the poem. He turned to Christ, and Christ then was able to get him through that. Christ brought him hope back. Don't we all do that sometimes? Don't we all feel so down and so desperate when life circumstances, when things happen in our world that go completely against our will, go completely against what we think should happen? And we wonder, how can God do that to us? We wonder, how can God, a loving God, do that to somebody that loves him? How many times have we said that to ourselves, to God himself, to other people? God, how can you turn on me like that? That was the despair that Longfellow was feeling as he's writing Christmas Bells. That's the despair that each one of us have had in our own lives. If we haven't had it in our lives, we will someday have it in our lives. Longfellow turns to Christ to get that hope back. We need to do the same. We need to be able to realize that Christ is with us through everything. Christ didn't make the things happen, the circumstances in life that are hurting you. Christ is there to support you through them. That is so easy to forget. It is so easy not to remember that. Especially when we're down, especially when we're in the midst of despair. Christ will turn it around for our lives. When Christ turned it around for Longfellow, he can turn it around for us. You know, sometimes we pray for God to do his will in our life, and then when it goes against what we think should be, we pout. When it goes against us, we begin to think that there's something wrong with God and why he would treat me this way. When hope in our lives, we're not necessarily hoping for the right things. Hope in our lives is something that we would never dream of. It's not, Longfellow realized that hope was not a favor or something that somebody does for him. Hope is something much deeper than that. Hope is something that we can have and realize that it's beyond any common dream that we would have in our life. It's a pinch me, waking me up, I'm sleeping kind of a hope. That is the everlasting life that we're going to have with Christ. That is the joy that we have with Christ in this world. Christ being with us. The song talks about peace on earth. And the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. Many of you have used the word shalom, or have heard the word shalom. Shalom in the dictionary simply means peace. But in the Hebrew language, it's actually much deeper than that. It goes much further than that. It is peace with love. It is peace among unbelievable, unimaginable turmoil. It's peace. It's a calmness and tranquility in your life, no matter what circumstances are there. Shalom is much deeper than peace. Shalom is peace with love. And recognizing that love. It's an inner peace that is there regardless of any circumstance. It's a peace that is deeply embedded in love. It is a peace knowing that faith is not believing everything will turn out okay. Faith is believing that no matter how things turned out, it will be okay. No matter the circumstances, it'll be okay. That is what shalom, peace, and faith is all about. May you have shalom. May you have peace and all